Look, I need you to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you, because what's happening right now in the precious metals market is something I haven't seen in my entire career. And if you're over 60, sitting on retirement savings, this affects you more than anyone else. 3 days ago, something extraordinary happened that barely made the news. The World Gold Council released data showing that central banks purchased 183 tons of gold in the third quarter alone. That's the highest quarterly purchase in over a decade. But here's what they're not telling you on CNBC or Bloomberg. These aren't random purchases. These are strategic, coordinated moves by nations preparing for something big. Let me paint you a picture of what's really going on. Right now, as I'm recording this, there's a 70-year-old woman in Ohio named Margaret. She worked as a school teacher for 38 years, saved diligently, and has about $340,000 in her 401k. She watches the evening news, sees inflation reports, and feels uneasy but doesn't know what to do. She represents millions of Americans over 60 who are watching their purchasing power evaporate in real time. Margaret's story matters because what's happening to her savings is not an accident. It's the predictable result of monetary policies that have been building for decades. And the people who understand this, the central banks, the sovereign wealth funds, the family offices managing generational wealth, they're all moving in the same direction. They're moving into gold and silver at a pace we've never witnessed before. Now, I want you to understand something fundamental about how money works. Every dollar in your bank account, every dollar in your retirement fund is a promise. It's a promise from the government that this piece of paper or this digital entry represents real value. But what happens when that promise becomes questionable? What happens when the very institutions making that promise start hedging their own bets? That's exactly what we're seeing. The People's Bank of China has been buying gold for 17 consecutive months. Not 1 month, not 3 months, 17 straight months. They're not doing this because they think gold is pretty. They're doing this because they're preparing for a fundamental shift in the global monetary system, and they're not alone. Poland just moved 100 tons of gold from the Bank of England back to Warsaw. Think about that for a moment. Why would a NATO ally, a member of the European Union, physically repatriate their gold reserves? Because trust in the current system is eroding, even among allies. They want their gold where they can see it, touch it, control it. But let's talk about what this means for you, specifically if you're over 60. You don't have 20 or 30 years to recover from a market crash. You don't have decades to wait out a currency crisis. Your timeline is different, and that means your strategy needs to be different. The conventional wisdom of stay the course and ride it out assumes you have time. But time is the one asset you can't buy more of. I've been analyzing markets for over 2 decades, and I can tell you that what we're experiencing right now is not normal volatility. This is structural change. The Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. What we've had since then is a pure fiat currency experiment, backed by nothing but faith in government promises. And that experiment is showing serious cracks. Consider what's happened to the dollar's purchasing power since 1971. A dollar then could buy what takes $7.50 today. That's not inflation, that's currency destruction, and it's accelerating. The M2 money supply, that's the total amount of dollars in circulation, increased by 40% in just 2 years during the pandemic response. 40% in 2 years. That money doesn't just disappear, it dilutes every dollar you've saved. Now, here's where silver enters the picture, and this is crucial for anyone looking at precious metals right now. While gold gets all the headlines, silver is setting up for something potentially more explosive. The gold-to-silver ratio, which historically averaged around 15 to 1, is currently sitting at 84 to 1. That means it takes 84 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. Why does this matter? Because silver is both a monetary metal and an industrial metal. It's used in solar panels, electric vehicles, 5G infrastructure, medical equipment, and countless other applications. Global silver demand hit 1.2 billion ounces last year, while mine production was only 830 million ounces. That's a 370 million ounce deficit, and it's getting worse. Let me tell you about a situation developing right now that almost nobody is talking about. The COMEX, that's the major commodities exchange where silver futures are traded, has been experiencing something unusual. The amount of physical silver available for delivery has been declining steadily. We're now at levels not seen since the 1990s. Meanwhile, the number of paper contracts claiming ownership of that same silver has exploded. This creates what's called a squeeze scenario. Imagine 10 people holding tickets to the same airplane seat. Everything works fine until everyone shows up to board. That's essentially what's building in the silver market. There are far more claims on physical silver than actual silver available to deliver. Quick aside here, and this is important if you're sitting on $100,000 or more in retirement accounts. I've put together a comprehensive guide on how gold IRAs actually work. It's completely free. Link is in the description below. It covers exactly how you can get physical precious metals into your retirement account without triggering tax penalties or early withdrawal fees. If that's relevant to your situation, definitely worth checking out. But let me get back to what's happening right now in these markets. The industrial demand for silver is not optional. You can't build a solar panel without silver. You can't manufacture an electric vehicle without silver. Every smartphone contains silver. As the world pushes toward green energy and electrification, silver demand is structural and growing. This isn't speculative demand that can disappear. This is real, physical consumption. And here's what makes this particularly interesting for the over 60 demographic. You remember the 1970s. You lived through that inflation. You saw what happened when faith in the dollar wavered. Gold went from $35 an ounce in 1971 to $850 in 1980. That's a 24-fold increase in less than a decade. Silver went from $1.50 to $50, a 33-fold increase. But this time is different in important ways. In the 1970s, the world wasn't drowning in debt. The U.S. national debt was under $1 trillion. Today it's $34 trillion and growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. The interest payments alone are now over $1 trillion annually. That's more than we spend on defense. Think about that. We're paying more just to service our debt than we spend on our entire military. This creates an impossible situation. The government needs inflation to devalue the debt. But inflation destroys the purchasing power of your savings. You're caught in the middle. And the traditional solutions, the ones your financial advisor probably recommended, they're not designed for this environment. Bonds, the traditional safe haven for retirees, bond prices move inverse to interest rates. If rates go up to fight inflation, bond values collapse. If rates stay low, inflation eats your purchasing power. You lose either way. Stocks. At current valuations with price-to-earnings ratios in the stratosphere, you're buying at the top of one of the longest bull markets in history. That's not a position you want to be in when you can't afford a 50% drawdown. Let me share another story that illustrates what's at stake. I spoke with a gentleman named Robert last month. He's 67, retired from the automotive industry with a pension and about $280,000 in savings. He did everything right, worked hard, saved consistently, lived below his means. But his pension, which seemed generous when he retired 5 years ago, has lost 20% of its purchasing power to inflation. His grocery bill has doubled. His insurance premiums have skyrocketed. He's watching his retirement dream slip away, not because he made bad decisions, but because the value of the dollar is being systematically destroyed. Robert's situation is not unique. It's the reality for millions of Americans who played by the rules and are now discovering that the rules have changed. The social contract that said, if you work hard and save, you'll be secure in retirement. That contract is being broken by monetary policy that prioritizes debt management over purchasing power preservation. Now, let's talk about what the smart money is doing. Not what they're saying, but what they're actually doing. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge fund, has been vocal about holding gold. Stanley Druckenmiller, one of the most successful investors of all time, recently disclosed a massive position in gold. These aren't gold bugs or conspiracy theorists. These are sophisticated investors with access to the best research and analysis money can buy. But it goes deeper than individual investors. Sovereign wealth funds, the investment arms of entire nations, are shifting allocations. The Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, managing over $700 billion, has been increasing precious metals exposure. Singapore's GIC, another massive sovereign fund, same story. These are the most conservative, long-term focused investors on the planet. They're not chasing trends. They're positioning for a fundamental shift. And then there's what's happening in the physical market that you won't see in the price charts. Premiums on physical gold and silver, that's the amount above spot price you pay for actual coins or bars, have been elevated for months. The U.S. Mint has had to ration silver eagles due to demand. Refineries are running at capacity. There's a disconnect between the paper price and the physical reality. This disconnect is important because it reveals the true supply-demand dynamics. The paper market, where futures contracts trade, can be manipulated through leverage and naked shorting. But the physical market doesn't lie. When people want actual metal in their hands, when they're willing to pay premiums of 20 to 30% over spot price, That tells you something about real demand. Let me explain how the paper market works, because this is crucial to understanding what might happen next. On the COMEX, you can sell contracts for gold or silver you don't actually own. It's called naked shorting. Large banks have been caught doing this repeatedly. They've paid billions in fines, but the fines are just a cost of doing business. They keep doing it because it's profitable. This creates artificial price suppression. When you can sell unlimited paper contracts, you can push prices down regardless of physical supply and demand. But this only works until it doesn't. Until someone stands for delivery and demands physical metal. Then the whole house of cards can collapse very quickly. We saw a preview of this in 2021 with the silver squeeze movement. Retail investors, coordinating online, started buying physical silver and standing for delivery on futures contracts. The price spiked from $25 to $30 in days. The establishment panicked. Trading was restricted. The movement was ridiculed in the media. But it revealed the vulnerability of the system. Now imagine that happening not with retail investors, but with central banks and sovereign wealth funds. Imagine China or Russia or India deciding they want physical delivery on their contracts. The system couldn't handle it. There isn't enough physical metal to satisfy all the paper claims. And that's when prices would truly explode. For someone over 60, this presents both a risk and an opportunity. The risk is being caught holding assets denominated in a depreciating currency when the music stops. The opportunity is positioning in real assets before the crowd realizes what's happening. And make no mistake, the crowd always realizes eventually. They just realize late. I want to take you back to 2008 for a moment because there are important parallels. When Lehman Brothers collapsed, when the financial system was teetering on the edge, what happened to gold? It initially dropped as everything sold off, but then it began a run from $800 to $1,900 over the next 3 years. Silver went from $9 to $50. The people who understood what was happening, who positioned before the crisis became obvious, they didn't just preserve wealth, they multiplied it. But here's what's different now. In 2008, central banks could cut rates to zero and print money to stabilize the system. They had ammunition. Today, we're already at the zero bound. We've already printed trillions. The next crisis, and there will be a next crisis, they won't have the same tools. They'll have to print even more, devalue even faster, and that's when precious metals will truly shine. The demographics of this are also crucial. The baby boomer generation, the largest and wealthiest generation in history, is now in retirement, or approaching it. They control the majority of investable assets. And they're starting to wake up to the reality that their retirement is under assault from inflation. When this generation shifts even a small percentage of their assets into precious metals, the impact on prices will be enormous. Think about the math. If just 5% of retirement assets in America moved into gold and silver, that would be over $1.5 trillion in new demand. The entire gold market is only about $12 trillion. The silver market is a fraction of that. The supply simply doesn't exist to meet that kind of demand without massive price increases. And this isn't speculation. This is basic supply and demand. Gold mine production has been flat for years. It takes 10 to 15 years to bring a new mine online. Silver production is actually declining as older mines deplete. Meanwhile, demand is accelerating from every direction. Central banks, industrial users, and increasingly retail investors who see what's coming. Let me tell you what keeps me up at night. It's not the possibility of precious metals going down. Corrections happen. Markets fluctuate. What concerns me is the possibility of a monetary reset happening faster than people can react. History shows us that currency crises, when they come quickly. The German hyperinflation of the 1920s, the collapse of the Argentine peso, the Zimbabwe dollar. These things accelerated rapidly once confidence was lost. And confidence is a fragile thing. It's built over decades but can be destroyed in days. Right now, confidence in the dollar is maintained by habit, by inertia, by the lack of obvious alternatives. But that's changing. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are actively working on alternatives to dollar-based trade. They're not doing this because they hate America. They're doing it because they see the writing on the wall. When you're over 60, you can't afford to be the last one to figure this out. You can't afford to wait until precious metals are front-page news and prices have already multiplied. By then, the opportunity to protect your purchasing power will have passed. The time to act is when it still feels early, when your friends think you're being paranoid, when the mainstream financial media is still dismissive. I've watched this pattern repeat throughout history. The people who preserve and grow wealth through monetary crises are the ones who act before it's obvious. They're the ones willing to look at uncomfortable truths and position accordingly. They're not smarter than everyone else. They're just willing to trust their own analysis over the crowd's complacency. Right now, you have a choice. You can continue holding assets denominated in a currency that's being systematically devalued. You can trust that somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, things will work out fine. Or you can take a portion of your wealth, the portion you absolutely cannot afford to lose, and put it into assets that have preserved purchasing power for 5,000 years. I'm not suggesting you put everything into precious metals. That would be foolish. Diversification matters, but I am suggesting that having zero exposure to gold and silver in this environment is a massive risk that most people over 60 are taking without even realizing it. They think they're being conservative by staying in traditional assets. But conservative means protecting against the most likely risks, and currency devaluation is not a remote possibility. It's happening right now. The silver market in particular offers something unique for retirees. It's more volatile than gold, which means more risk, but also more potential reward. And because the market is smaller, the price moves can be more dramatic. When silver moves, it moves fast. In 2011, it went from $18 to $50 in less than a year. That's the kind of move that can make a real difference in a retirement portfolio. But timing matters. Not because you need to catch the exact bottom, but because the longer you wait, the more risk you take that events overtake your ability to act. What if there's a banking crisis and capital controls are imposed? What if premiums on physical metal spike so high that it becomes prohibitively expensive? What if the government decides to restrict precious metals ownership like they did in 1933? These aren't far-fetched scenarios. They're historical precedents. In 1933, FDR signed Executive Order 6102, requiring Americans to turn in their gold to the government at $20.67 per ounce. Then the government immediately revalued gold to $35 per ounce. That was a 70% confiscation of wealth. It happened in America. It can happen again. Now, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to wake you up to realities that the financial establishment doesn't want you thinking about. Because if everyone over 60 suddenly decided to protect their wealth with precious metals, it would expose the fragility of the current system. It would reveal that the emperor has no clothes. The beauty of gold and silver is their simplicity. They're not someone else's liability. They don't depend on a government's promise or a corporation's solvency. They're real, tangible assets that have been recognized as money for millennia. When everything else is uncertain, when trust is breaking down, when the future is unclear, gold and silver are the ultimate insurance policy. And insurance is exactly how you should think about this. You don't buy homeowner's insurance hoping your house burns down. You buy it for peace of mind, knowing that if the worst happens, you're protected. Precious metals are financial insurance. They protect against currency collapse, banking crises, government mismanagement, and the countless other ways that paper wealth can evaporate. For someone over 60, peace of mind is worth something. The ability to sleep at night knowing that a portion of your wealth is protected, that no matter what happens to the dollar or the stock market or the banking system, you have real assets that will hold value, that's priceless. And it's something that more and more people are starting to understand. The next few years are going to be unlike anything we've experienced in our lifetimes. The combination of massive debt, demographic shifts, geopolitical tensions, and monetary experimentation is creating a perfect storm. The people who recognize this and position accordingly will be the ones who not only survive, but thrive. The people who ignore it, who trust that somehow things will muddle through, they're the ones who will look back with regret. You've worked too hard, saved too long, and sacrificed too much to let your retirement be destroyed by forces beyond your control. But you do have control over how you position your assets. You do have the ability to protect yourself, and the time to do that is now, while you still can, while precious metals are still available at reasonable prices, while you still have options. This is not about getting rich quick. This is about preserving what you've spent a lifetime building. It's about ensuring that the retirement you planned for is the retirement you get to live. It's about taking responsibility for your financial future instead of hoping that the government or the Federal Reserve or your financial advisor will somehow protect you. Because here's the hard truth. Nobody cares about your retirement as much as you do. Nobody will protect your wealth if you don't. And the window to act is closing. Not tomorrow, not next year, but gradually and then suddenly, the way these things always happen. Don't be the person who looks back and wishes they had acted when they had the chance. Be the person who saw what was coming and did something about it.